So we're here in Cape May, New Jersey. Nice little weekend away without the kids, right?
Yes, very nice. Thank you, Mom.
Yes. We were planning on spending the day at the beach and having a couple of days walking around in the nice weather, but Mother Nature did not cooperate, and we got a windy, cloudy, rainy...
75% of it was windy, cloudy.
Yeah.
Saturday was nice.
Yeah. So my plan for this week's video was to shoot a comparison between shooting in auto and in the more manual modes and compare the images, but it was just not a great weekend for that. So instead, what I'm going to do is talk about the best budget full frame cameras. And I was talking to Nancy here about, I was telling her about how Eric just got the new Canon R, and I said, Canon has the Z, which is kind of like what my D750 is, but in a mirrorless, and it'd be cool to get that. And what'd you say?
Do you really need that?
And I said, no, not really. And and what did you say? Was there anything wrong with your camera?
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with your camera. It takes perfectly good pictures. There's no need to buy another camera.
Well, okay. Other than that, I really want one. But so I thought that was an interesting topic then. So if you, not just to buy a camera, but if you want a full frame camera and, you don't have a ton of money to spend, but you want to get into full frame, I wanted to talk about my camera, which is now going on 5 years old, and it's still a real viable option for someone looking to get into this. So I'm going to talk about all of the budget cameras in this price segment. Canon makes one, Sony, Nikon, and there's mirrorless options and not. But when I get home, I'm going to be talking about that. So we have a long drive back.
But I have to laugh because budget, they're not budget. They're not.
Well, all right. But if you look at full frame cameras,
okay.
My camera when I bought it was $2,300.
Right.
Okay, now you can get it for $1,200 and change, and if you're willing to buy used, you can get it for under $1,000.
What a bargain.
Well, don't be a wise guy. Listen, you were looking at a handbag that was $247.
Did I buy it?
You
I
didn't
did
buy
not
it.
buy it.
No.
I actually checked on Amazon, saw that it was
Okay.
the same price, and said, you know what, that's just a bit too much.
Okay. See, and I didn't buy a Nikon Z6 yet.
There you go.
All right. So, if you have these thoughts going through your head, and should you spend the money or not, I'm going to try to give you some opinions on what might be right for you. Okay, I'll see you back at home. So I'm back at home, and as much as I wanted to try to do this video that I was planning to do with my wife and kind of shoot around Cape May, it just wasn't happening. But we were talking about cameras and gear because I had my D750 with me and I had all my stuff with me. I was talking about the new camera that Eric got, and like she said in the video, do you really need a new camera? And actually I don't. I mean, my D750 is a really good camera, but it's going on 4 or 5 years old now, and technology changes. But to be honest with you, the images that I'm getting out of this camera I love still, and I never say, oh, I wish my camera could do that, because it really just does everything I need it to do. But with that being said, it's 2019, and I wanted to talk about cameras that you can buy today that kind of fall under that $1,500 full frame price point. The Canon 5D Mark IV, the new Eos R, the Nikon Z6 and 7, the D850, Sony's, the A7 R3, all these new cameras, they're expensive. They're $2,000 and up. So if you're a photographer, maybe you're just getting started and you want to bypass a crop sensor camera and go right into a full frame camera, which by the way is what Eric and I both did. We both I started with his old 5D Mark II, and he went from film right to a 5D, which was a full frame camera. So we never really shot much with crop sensor cameras. Now I do own a D7000 Nikon that I bought for my wife years ago that she doesn't really use that much. So I use it as like a backup camera or a secondary camera. A lot of times I'll just leave my fisheye lens on it because it's a crop sensor, so it's made for that size sensor. But it's a very capable camera. But I'm used to the capabilities of a full frame sensor. Full frame cameras will give you better ISO performance. The images, they just, I don't know, to me there's just something about them. The depth of field is better. So if you're looking to get into a full frame camera, you don't have a huge amount of money to spend. I'm going to talk about 5 cameras that are available today that are under the $1,500 price point. So the first I'm going to talk about is what Canon is offering right now. We've been shooting with the Canon M50, which is a crop sensor mirrorless camera, and we really like it. And this is my first Canon camera that I've owned in quite a few years. I had the 5D2 back in the day, and then I had a Nikon D600, and now I have a Nikon D750 plus my D7000. So it took me a little while to get used to the Canon system again. Eric has been all the way through with his Canon gear, and now that he's got the Eos R, I got to play with that a little bit and take some shots with it the other day, and I really, really like it. That camera's $2,000. So the next step down from that is the Eos Rp, which is a full-frame mirrorless camera, entry level. It retails right now at about $1,300, and it's a 26 megapixel camera. It's mirrorless. It's got a smaller body than the DSLR, but it still feels good in the hand. It's got the flip-out screen. It has image stabilization, but only for video, and it's digital. So it's not the best when you start moving around. You get some wonkiness in the video, but it's there. It has Canon's excellent autofocus. It's great for photography and for video. So that's a really good entry-level camera. Now you have to get I think it comes with an adapter actually. It comes with the adapter that lets you use all of Canon's EFS and EF lenses, just like the M50 came with an adapter that we could use all of the Canon lenses on that. So what's great about that is you're buying a mirrorless camera with the ability to buy into Canon's new R lens lineup, but you also have the backwards compatibility of their EF and EFS lenses. So you have a huge amount of lenses to choose from when you're using the new Canon Rp camera. Now Canon also offers in this price point actually almost the identical price point with almost the identical sensor is the 6D Mark II. Now this is a DSLR, so it's a little bit different. You're going to have an optical viewfinder instead of a electronic viewfinder like the Rp has. And the difference between that is the optical viewfinder is basically you're looking through a mirror and it's showing you what is looking right out at the lens. It's not going to show you your exposure when you look through the actual viewfinder on the camera, where an electronic viewfinder, as you make adjustments and you're looking through the viewfinder, it actually will adjust. So if you raise your ISO, the image that you're looking at is going to get brighter. So that's very useful. And now the M50 can do the same thing, but I just don't love it. The camera's too small to bring up to my eye. It just doesn't feel right to me. But when I used it with Eric's new EOS R, it worked very well, and it took a little getting used to with the focusing on the trackpad, on the back and everything, but it was a nice user experience. It's different because it does look a little digital. It doesn't look as natural as an optical viewfinder, which is what I'm used to, but I'm sure I could get used to it. So that's a nice feature to have. The 6D doesn't have that, but it's it has the nice autofocus, the Canon's dual pixel autofocus that works fantastically for video, for stills. It's just a good all-around DSLR, entry level. Can use the Canon EF and EFS lenses on it. So you have quite a lens selection to use on this camera. So this is a great camera to start with if you're looking to get an entry-level DSLR. Which one would I go with if I was going to buy, if I had nothing? I would go with the Rp and get into the mirrorless. I just would. It's the future of photography, and that's just the way I would go with it. So while the 6D2 is a great camera and a lot of people like using it, I would go with the mirrorless at this point if I was buying into the Canon system now. Okay, Nikon has only one offering in this price point, really. So the Z6 and the Z7 are both over $2,000. The D850 is up around $3,000. So the D750, which is what I shoot with, when I bought this camera it was $2,300. It's now $1,296 today, just for the body. And this is a workhorse DSLR, jack of all trades, can do it all camera. This camera I've taken thousands and thousands and thousands of shots. In fact, in Lightroom, I clicked on the camera to see how many images I have in my Lightroom catalog. With this camera, 65,000 images I've taken. So I know this camera intimately. I love this camera. It's big, it's heavy in your hands, the lenses are big. It feels like a professional camera. It's not as big as the D850, which I actually like because it just feels right in my hands. Once you start getting to the bigger camera bodies, they start to get heavy and they just feel very big. So this camera, along with the mirrorless cameras that are coming out with now, are a nice size. And I'm going to talk about Sony in a minute, and Sony is a little too small for me, I find. So, you have to, a lot of this has to do with you. You have to feel the cameras. You have to see how they feel for you, how the ergonomics of the camera are in your hands. So everybody's a little bit different in that way. This is a 24 megapixel camera. This is the only camera in this group for under $1,500 that has dual memory card slots. Now, this is important to me. I've talked about it before in other videos, but this is a huge, huge thing for me. And if you shoot professionally or you shoot anywhere where you're getting paid and you need to have the images, this is something that's super important. Now, the Canon Rp has the ability to save raw images to I guess it's like an app in an iPad. So you can wirelessly transfer your images to, I think it's an iPad only app, but I'm not sure about that. If I'm not right, you can correct me down below, but it has the ability to transfer that, and it can transfer JPEGs to your phone or to anything else. So if you want a backup of your images, all of these cameras have a way to wirelessly transfer images, to your camera. They all have Wi-Fi. They all have some sort of backing up. If you want to have backups of your raw images, the RP and that digital setup is the only way to do it, or you shoot with 2 cards, which is what I do. Now my camera is getting older, and the whole prompt of this thing was I wanted to maybe look into a Nikon Z6 because I like the mirrorless and it's all that Nikon offers, and I own a lot of good Nikon lenses. So I don't want to get rid of all my stuff and totally start reinvesting in Canon or Sony, which a lot of people do, and I'm not ready to do that yet. And my camera is fine, and for what I use it for, it's absolutely great. Now, the Canon cameras have flip out screens that articulate. They can go out to the side. My M50 that I'm looking at the screen right now is actually facing me. The Nikons, it actually flips out like this, and that's it. So if I have the camera pointed at myself like this, I cannot see the screen. Now if I'm shooting, below me like this or above me, it's fine. And I use that all the time. But I would like an articulating screen, and Nikon just has not done that yet. I'm not sure why, but they're not doing that. So if that's something that you do and you shoot video, first of all, that's another thing. If you shoot video, you're going to want that. And if you shoot video, you're not going to want this camera. This is not an easy camera to use for video. The autofocus is terrible for video. Canon's autofocus is great. So if video is part of what you do, then I would steer away from this camera, the D750. If you're only a photographer shooting stills, this is a fantastic camera. And if you want to see what it can do, all you have to do is look at our Instagram accounts, and everything I've shot that you see on those accounts, and Facebook, and just any images that you see in this video that aren't from the M50, they're all shot with this camera. So it's a very capable camera. Now Sony has 2 cameras in this price point, and they have they actually have 3, but I'm not going to talk about one of them. One is the Sony A7, but they also have the A7 II, so I'm going to talk about that camera. The A7 II is a steal right now. You can get it for under $900. So if you want to get into the Sony ecosystem and you don't have a lot of money to spend, $898, and that even comes with a lens. So you can get started for a very, very inexpensive price point. Now this is a 24 megapixel camera. It has a single memory card slot also, not a dual memory card slot. It's a smaller body, so when you hold it in your hand, if you have big hands, this might feel a little uncomfortable to you, and it does to me. I've held Sony cameras at trade shows. Some of my friends have Sony cameras. I don't love the ergonomics of them. They just don't feel great to me. But that being said, at that price point, if you like the way they feel and it feels good to you, you can get into full frame photography here at a great price point, and it might be super worth it to get started here. And because Sony's cameras just keep getting better and better. Every time they release one, it's better than the last one. Their autofocus is very good, and this is the only camera that has in-body stabilization. So for under $900, you're getting a camera that has in-body stabilization, whereas like my D750 does not. I have to buy lenses that have stabilization in them. So that's what I end up doing because I want the stabilization. It helps out in low light, and it just lets you shoot at slower shutter speeds than you normally be able to. But with it in the body, that's great. And the newer, more expensive mirrorless cameras are all starting to go to that. So at this price point, I mean, it's great that this has it built in. The other camera that Sony has just falls under that $1,500 mark. It's at $1,498, and that's the A7 R2. Now this is a step up from the A7 II. It's just a newer version, and it's a really great camera. But now you're stepping up into that $1,500 price point for the camera body only. So maybe, if you now you get into that point, well, this is a little bit older. Sony has some newer cameras, or if maybe you want to look at the Canon or the Nikon Z6 or the Canon R, now you're only a few $100s apart, so that's up to you and your budget. But this is also a great camera. The Sony cameras, I can't tell you how many people that I know that have just sold everything and just totally switched over, and they love them. They love so many things about them, the silent shooting modes and the autofocus and the eye detect autofocus and the size, and the image quality is spectacular. Now this one has a 42 megapixel sensor. The other ones are all around 24. So you might be, oh, 42 megapixels, that's awesome. Well, here's an example. I've edited images from all of these cameras basically. There is a difference with the speed and what you can do when you're editing based on the size of the sensor in the camera. You're gathering more information, there's more megapixels, the files are bigger, and they're slower to work with the bigger they get. Now, I have never once said I need more resolution in my 24 megapixel D750. Never once. Eric has been shooting for years with his 5D series, and the one he has now, the 5D4, I believe is around 30. So he's still not that crazy high amount of megapixels. I edited a few Sony shots from my friend Jamie, who sent me some of his raw images, and he has the A7R3, I believe, and they're in the 40-something megapixel range, and it really slowed down my computer. And I have a pretty powerful laptop here, and I found the file size is big to work with, and I couldn't move as fast, and I didn't like it actually. It kind of disrupted my workflow a bit. So that's something you should think about also when you're getting into this. If you don't need to blow these things up super huge, and you're not going to be cropping into the little tiny portions of the image, maybe you don't need that. That's something that you have to decide for your type of photography. And if you're new, you maybe don't even know that yet. But camera bodies are always changing and always evolving, and you're going to, at some point, continue to step into new cameras. So maybe when you're first starting out, it's a better idea to spend the money on good lenses. So if you were looking to get into the Sony ecosystem, you know, spending $900, but then taking that other $600 and buying a lens or putting it towards a really good lens, I think is a better way to go. I just want to talk about dynamic range for a second. These cameras all have really good dynamic range, and that means you have a lot of room to edit. There's a lot of information hidden in the shadows, and you're able to bring down the highlights, and manipulate the files because the cameras capture so much information. Now, having edited Sony, Nikon, and Canon images over the past 6 months, I would say the Canon images have the least amount of dynamic range. Not that it's bad, but it's not at the same level as Nikon and Sony. This is just my personal opinion, just from my editing that I've done here. You may have a different opinion, but I don't care one way or the other. I don't have a preference one way. If somebody handed me a Canon today, I'd shoot with a Canon or a Nikon. All of these cameras at this point are fantastic and they're so good. But, once you get exposed to different things, you start to see where some cameras shine and some don't. Now, I worked on my friend Jamie's Sony image, and it was phenomenal. And I've also edited Eric's images out of his 5D4, and they're also fantastic images, but they don't have the dynamic range that the Sony did. And my Nikon kind of falls more towards the Sony, where I don't even have to shoot HDRs anymore because there's so much information in them. Well, if that's something that's important to you, you may want to go with the Sony or the Nikon, but neither one of them have a flip-up screen, or actually all three of them, that you can actually see yourself. So if video is a component that you want in your photography or vlogging or whatever you want to do, then the Canon is your only choice really. Yeah, you might lose a little dynamic range, but you're going to gain so much with the video screen flipping out and the autofocus that it has. So there's a lot going in with this. So there is no best camera. These are your options at this point. In 2019, this is where you're at, under $1,500. Now, that doesn't mean you can't buy a used camera also, because that is a great way to save a lot of money and get a better piece of gear than you would be able to if you have a hard budget. So if you said to me, I only have $1,200, well then maybe you can find a Canon 5D3 used for less than that instead of getting a 6D2. And the 5D3, it has the dual memory card slots, the body's a little more robust, and I'm sure there's some features in there that, warrant the price difference that those two cameras have. So that might be something that's important to you. You're going to lose the flippy screen. So that, these are all things that you have to look at for yourself, your type of shooting. This card right here is going to be of me and Eric talking about his Canon are. And we go into a lot of this stuff, DSLR, and why we want to go mirrorless and why you may not want to. And this one is going to be my Nikon D750 and the horrible autofocus it has for video. And you actually get a kick out of it in the first few minutes. It's terrible. Okay, see you in the next one.